Hello and welcome to another episode of Star Wars Starship Versus, the series where you take two of your favorite Star Wars spaceships, put them head to head to see which one would come out on top. Today we are looking at two heavily customized, heavily modified ships, with the Millennium Falcon taking on Slave One, the ship of Boba Fett. Now of course these two ships have fought in space battles before, most notably in the Dark Empire comics, and in the 2013 Shadow of Yavin comic. I'm going to put a link down in the description where you can buy both of these comics. Dark Empire specifically is a whole lot of fun because it features the Eclipse Super Star Destroyer, a reborn Emperor Palpatine, and lots of other fun stuff. I'm going to actually disregard these prior meetings that I just mentioned, and I'm going to do so for a couple of reasons. The first is that in these videos I like to focus on the ships themselves, not the people that pilot them. Obviously, Han Solo and Boba Fett are both very good pilots. Han Solo is particularly good at evading capture, so I want to just see what would happen if two pilots of the same skill went up against each other in these two ships. Second, I want to take these two ships in the way they existed in the original trilogy. And because those battles I just mentioned were in the expanded universe, each of the craft had various other upgrades and differences and changes that I don't really want to look at here. But before I get too far into today's matchup, I just want to go back and look at the poll results for last video, which saw the X-Wing taking on the ARC-170 Starfighter. I predicted that the heavier but less maneuverable ARC-170 would win about 7 times out of 10 if it encountered an X-Wing. Well, it seems like you guys agreed with me, because 77% of you, which this time came out to 2,324 of you, thought the ARC-170 would come out on top. 556 of you thought the X-Wing would win, 121 of you thought that it was too close to tell. So in total we got 3,001 responses, a great number. For this video I'd really like to aim to break the 3,000 barrier again, so let's see if we can do it. I'll put a link at the end of the video after I go through the analysis where you can vote on who you thought should have won. Alright, so as always we're going to be evaluating these two ships based on several categories: firepower, defensive capabilities, fighter support, and intangibles. Now, as I always say, just because a ship wins 2 or even 3 of these categories does not necessarily mean that they win the matchup, because I am evaluating these two ships overall. Alright, let's look first at firepower, and it might be helpful to get a little background on these ships as we move forward. The Millennium Falcon was, at one point at least, a standard YT-1300 light freighter. Now, a light freighter on its own isn't really well suited for combat. However, the various owners of the ship, including, of course, Han Solo, made various modifications, including adding weaponry, improving shielding, etc. Slave One, on the other hand, was a modified Firespray 31 class patrol and attack craft. And you can think of a Firespray 31 as kind of a police vehicle meant to transfer prisoners. So I think we can see why the ship, and particularly its holding cells, would be attractive to a bounty hunter like Boba Fett. The ship was used by Boba and of course his father Jango during the Clone Wars, the Galactic Civil War, and in Legends Beyond. So as I previously mentioned, we're going to be taking these two ships as they existed during the Galactic Civil War. So when we're talking about weaponry, for the Millennium Falcon, its main anti-ship weapons were 2 quad laser cannons, along with a concussion missile launcher. And that gives the Slave One 2 rotating blaster cannons, a concussion missile launcher, an ion cannon, and a proton torpedo launcher. However, it's most likely that the ship wouldn't have carried proton torpedoes and concussion missiles at the same time, so for the sake of clarity, I'll give the ship proton torpedoes. The question though, of course, is which ship is better armed, and in my opinion, it's pretty clearly the Millennium Falcon. I mean, Slave One is still very well armed, and its ion cannon adds a bit of versatility. That being said, I think the quad laser cannons of the Millennium Falcon really give it an edge. And to be honest, when I was checking the comments for last video under the suggestion, I was really surprised to see people kind of undervaluing and underappreciating how good these weapons actually are. I mean, we see at various points in the original trilogy that these guns are extremely powerful. I mean, they can shred a TIE fighter or a TIE interceptor easily in one shot. And I mean, when we watch A New Hope, we see that the cannon can actually shoot pretty quickly at full speed. But I mean, I think the biggest thing about these quad laser cannons is that they're manned, and this is completely different than anything on the Slave One. You can have a pilot flying the ship, worrying about evading fire, and then having these 2 gunners shooting down enemies. And I mean, through most of the trilogy, you can't really see how effective these guns would be because they're not often manned. However, in the Battle of Endor, there are 2 gunners in the Falcon while Lando's piloting it, and you can really see just how easily the ship shreds other fighters. Other than that, I'd say that the proton torpedoes of the Slave One are probably about just as strong as the concussion missiles on the Millennium Falcon. And while the ion cannon on the Slave One certainly is a bonus, I still don't think it's as useful as the Mandible quad laser cannon on the Falcon. So yes, I'll give this category to the YT-1300 freighter. Alright, so let's now talk about shielding, and we don't know a whole lot about the Slave One in this aspect. Well, we have heard a lot about the Millennium Falcon, so that does perhaps make this part of the matchup a little bit unfair. The standard fire spray, which again is the basis for the Slave One, was about twice as durable as an X-Wing, at least in shielding. Now, obviously the Slave One was heavily upgraded, so its shielding and its hull were most likely upgraded as well. But again, we don't know how well it was upgraded. The durability of the Falcon, on the other hand, has received a lot of attention. And if we're going by legends, which I have for the rest of the video, the Falcon was said to be protected by armor plating from an Imperial II class Star Destroyer. And I mean, along with that, the ship was also said to have upgraded shields, again, stolen from a much heavier kind of ship. And I mean, the ship's supposed to be very kind of junky looking, but very, very strong. I mean, we see it in the movies, take shots from Imperial Star Destroyers without being destroyed or even disabled. So I think I really have no choice but to give this category to the Falcon. Alright, so with the Falcon 2 for 2, let's now look at the rest of the matchup. I think I can skip fighter complement because it's obvious that neither of these ships really carried any other combat-ready vehicles. Alright now, so let's quickly look at intangibles as well, although I'm going to only do so briefly because I think it's getting pretty clear how this battle is going to turn out. So both the Falcon and Slave One are quite fast, though the Falcon does have a slightly faster top speed. The Falcon is also, based on what we've seen, the more maneuverable of the two vessels, although I will say it is much larger and thus a much larger target. Finally, I just want to mention that the Slave One was meant to be piloted by one person, while the Falcon was meant to have at least two pilots and typically would have had a pilot, a co-pilot, and a couple of gunners. Alright, so let's now look at the battle. The Millennium Falcon and Slave One come across each other in the middle of space. What do they do? And this is interesting because the Millennium Falcon's first response typically is to run, and that's just due to its speed and the fact that it's meant to be a smuggling ship. Still, if we assume that it can't, what happens? Well, I think I've kind of been tipping my hand throughout this video. The Millennium Falcon has the advantage of having two dedicated gunners, and I think that, along with its speed and maneuverability, really give it an edge in this battle. It should be able to flee from Slave One while avoiding the other ship's still very deadly weapons, while putting shots in on it through the gunners. Again, the Falcon is very versatile because it can fly one way while shooting another way. The Falcon also has the advantage of being very durable. I mean, even if Slave One gets a couple of shots in, the ship should be able to keep going without suffering too much damage or losing any critical systems. In my opinion, when you really look at it, if you've got pilots of equal skill piloting each ship, and the two ships exist as they would have typically during the original trilogy, then I think the Falcon is just too fast, too durable, and that its cannons give too big of an advantage for it to lose to the Slave One, at least if they're both in good working order. In conclusion, I give this matchup to the Millennium Falcon, and I think if the Corellian ship were to run into Slave One, that it would probably come out on top 8.5 times out of 10. Now, I think this one might be kind of controversial, because I know that a lot of you guys like Boba Fett, and that you like his ship. Well, I do too, but I just think that, and part of this probably comes from the fact that the Millennium Falcon is the main ship of the good guys, that it's just too strong for the bounty hunter ship to handle. But now's your chance to let me know. Take a second and vote. You can do so by clicking the little bubble that will appear in the top right corner of the screen. Again, I'd like to get at least 3,000 votes for today's episode, and tune in next time and I'll read out exactly how many people voted for each ship. Also, make sure that you guys leave a comment letting me know what you think. Did I miss something? Did I mischaracterize the weapons of Boba Fett's ship? Was I too much for the Millennium Falcon? Was I underplaying the Slave One's armor? Anything like that, let me know down in the comments. And of course, if you have an idea for next video's matchup, make sure that you also put that in the comments. And if you see a matchup that you like, make sure to give it a thumbs up and leave a supporting comment, because that's how I get my ideas for future videos. Anyways guys, thank you so much for watching, and as always, may the Force be with you.